At the head of this vast host rides Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, master of the most feared fighting force on the face of the earth. His conquests through the Balkans have left towns in ashes and fortresses silent as tombs. Now his attention turns to Vienna, the golden prize of Europe. If Vienna falls, the gateway to Germany yawns open. If Vienna falls, Italy will tremble. If Vienna falls, the battered kingdoms of Christendom may collapse like a row of fragile dominoes. The Sultan has promised Mustafa the golden apple, the ancient emblem of world dominion. "Bring me this final jewel," he said, "and the world will know its new master." Europe understands the meaning of those words. And yet, Europe does nothing. The Holy Roman Empire stands fractured, paralyzed by politics and old grievances. Its emperor has already fled the threatened city. France watches the drama from the shadows, unwilling to lift a finger for its Austrian rivals. The Italian states quarrel over petty matters. Protestants and Catholics still lick wounds from the wars that once tore the continent apart. Each nation sees only its own interests. None notice the abyss slowly yawning beneath them. Only one man believes the tide can still be turned: King Jan III Sobieski of Poland. 60 years old, hardened by a lifetime of battles against Turks and Tatars, a soldier king whose faith burns with unsettling intensity. Where others see doom, Sobieski sees responsibility. Where others see hopeless odds, he sees Providence calling him forward. His kingdom is weary, his coffers nearly empty, his army a shadow of its former strength. And yet, his resolve shines brighter than the sun rising over the Carpathians. He sends a message to Vienna: "Hold, I am coming." He does not ask permission. He waits for no treaties, no promises of payment. He simply summons every rider who can lift a lance and begins the most grueling forced march in Polish history. For Sobieski knows there are moments when men must stop counting the cost and simply pay it. By mid-July, the Ottoman encirclement tightens around Vienna. A vast host of 150,000 presses against a meager garrison of 15,000 defenders. The city walls are ancient, built long before gunpowder could pulverize stone. Commanding the defenders is Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, a man of unyielding will who understands their position is hopeless, but refuses surrender. The siege engines begin their terrible work. Cannons thunder day and night. Ottoman sappers claw beneath the walls, collapsing bastions in eruptions of dust, fire, and screams. The defenders fight for every yard, every shattered stone, every fleeting hour of daylight. Inside Vienna, time is measured in heartbeats and whispered prayers. Kara Mustafa reclines in his silk-draped pavilion, dining on lamb and honey, while Vienna starves behind its crumbling walls. He builds a city of tents, so immense it takes an hour to walk from one end to the other. He entertains foreign envoys as though the siege were a grand performance staged for their amusement. His officers beg for a full assault, but Mustafa refuses. Why waste lives when hunger will break the city for him? He gazes south, west, east, but never north. He cannot imagine anyone reckless enough to challenge him. All Europe watches the horizon glow with the flames of Vienna and assumes the outcome is certain. The only question is how soon the city will fall. Vienna is dying slowly. Smoke hangs above the rooftops like a funeral veil. The streets echo only with distant cannon fire and the cries of the wounded. Food dwindles, then vanishes. Leather belts are boiled into soup. Rats become rare luxuries. The elderly and the very young perish first, not from Turkish blades, but from starvation. Water grows scarce. Disease spreads. Dysentery, fever, wounds that fester instead of healing. And still they hold the walls. Civilians dig alongside soldiers. Old men stand guard through the night. Boys carry stones to seal breaches. Women load muskets with steady, practiced hands. Every dawn, Starhemberg climbs the ramparts and counts the new ruptures in the defenses. Every dawn, there are more. 3 great breaches already gape in the outer works. Only 4,000 defenders remain fit to fight. They have endured 2 months. They cannot endure much longer. Starhemberg writes in his diary, "We are ghosts defending a tomb, yet we will not yield." Outside the shattered walls, Kara Mustafa grows ever more complacent. Merchants set up bazaars between the tents. Musicians play at dusk. In his mind, he has already divided the riches of Vienna like spoils waiting for his hand. But far to the north, something begins to stir. An army gathers, not large by the measure of empires, but united by purpose. Sobieski has summoned every ally who will answer. Duke Charles of Lorraine brings 20,000 Austrian and German troops. The southern German princes add a few thousand more. And from Poland, after crossing 500 miles of mountains, storms, and hostile territory, Sobieski leads his legendary Winged Hussars southward. 3,000 elite cavalrymen, armored in steel worth more than a peasant could hope to earn in a lifetime. Even combined with the imperial forces, they number barely 27,000 against 80,000 Ottomans. The ratio is madness, suicide dressed in armor. Sobieski does not care about numbers. He cares about obligation. He writes to his beloved wife, "I go to save Vienna. If I fall there, tell our children their father died doing what God required." Inside Vienna, as August fades into September, despair settles like winter frost. The walls crumble faster than they can be patched. Gunpowder stores run dangerously low. Ottoman mines edge closer to their final, fatal explosion. On September 9th, Starhemberg dispatches his last messenger through enemy lines with one desperate plea. "Come now, or do not come at all. We have days, perhaps hours." On the night of September 10th, a rumor courses through the starving city like a spark on dry straw. A sentry claims he saw fires on distant ridges. Another swears he heard trumpets echoing from the mountains. By dawn, the people of Vienna crowd the ramparts, staring northward with empty stomachs and fading strength, praying the rumors are true. And then, just before dawn on September 11th, they see it. A ripple of color rising over the ridges of the Kahlenberg. Standards, hundreds upon hundreds of them, catching the early light. The double-headed eagle of the Holy Roman Empire. The white eagle of Poland. The banners of Bavaria, Saxony, Franconia. The relief army has arrived. Inside Vienna, church bells ring for the first time in weeks. People collapse in the streets, sobbing from exhaustion and sudden hope. They do not know whether this small force can save them, but for the first time in 2 months, they believe they may not die alone. A whisper passes through the starving city, from cellar to rooftop. The Polish king is coming. The march south had been a prayer hammered into flesh and steel. Jan Sobieski had led his army across 500 miles of rugged wilderness, over the Carpathians where summer storms turned mountain paths into churning rivers of mud. Through forests so dense the daylight vanished for days, across rain-swollen rivers that threatened to tear men and horses apart. Yet they pressed on, 40 miles a day, sometimes 50 when desperation spurred them. They slept in their saddles. They ate while riding. Vienna was dying, and every hour lost was a life extinguished. At the vanguard rode the Winged Hussars, those living legends who had become myth long before the last of them would fall. Knights clad in armor that shone like trapped sunlight. Behind their shoulders rose great arching wings of eagle feathers fixed to wooden frames. No mere ornament, but a weapon of terror refined over generations. The sight alone made them seem larger than mortal men. And the sound, an uncanny, rising roar as 3,000 hussars charged at full speed, was the last sound countless enemies ever heard. Each hussar was a lord of war, sheathed in plate and mail from head to heel, carrying an 18-foot lance of hollowed wood, light enough to wield with one arm, strong enough to punch through a man and his mount in a single thrust. They were nobles, landowners, men of wealth and status. Any one of them could have remained safe at home. But they rode to Vienna because honor demanded it, because their king called, because some duties are greater than survival. They were the last true knights of Europe. At Tulln, Sobieski joined forces with Duke Charles of Lorraine and the imperial contingents. Poles and Austrians, who had nursed old suspicions, now stood shoulder to shoulder. Catholic and Protestant soldiers, who should have been enemies, recognized each other as brothers. Vienna was dying, and if Vienna fell, all of them would follow. Faith and fear bound them together. Ancient hatreds melted into the earth beneath their boots. Only the coming charge mattered. On the evening of September 11th, the Allied army reached the edge of the Vienna woods. They made camp beneath the trees, whispering in the darkness, no fires, no songs. At dawn on September 12th, the commanders climbed to the summit of the Columnberg. What they saw below stole the breath from their lungs. The Ottoman encampment spread across the plains like a second city, 80,000 disciplined soldiers drawn up for war. Cavalry reserves by the tens of thousands. Artillery parks bristling with bronze cannons. Crescent banners so numerous they turned the field into a sea of green and red silk. Between the mountain ridge and the desperate city lay open ground, perfect killing fields watched by Ottoman guns. Even Sobieski, who had marched through war his entire life, felt the weight of what they faced. 27,000 men against 80,000 of the Sultan's finest. A younger commander might have hesitated, might have waited, might have prayed for better odds. But Sobieski understood what Kara Mustafa did not, that history sometimes demands sacrifice without calculation. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear decide the future. That when darkness gathers at the gates, good men do not beg for better chances, they give everything they have. He turned to his generals, voice steady, carrying the quiet certainty of a man who knows destiny has chosen its hour. Gentlemen, we attack at noon. The Hussars will lead. Make your peace with God. Across the Allied lines, men knelt. Catholic priests whispered blessings. Protestant chaplains led hymns. For one brief morning, there was no divide between them. They were simply Christians preparing to meet the shadow. The Winged Hussars tightened their straps, tested lance balance, smoothed their horses' manes. Some wrote final letters to loved ones. Others simply stood still, eyes closed, drawing one last breath of morning air, memorizing its scent in case it was their final gift from the world. At the 11th hour, the Allied army began its careful descent from the Columnberg. The sun was still low, gilding the treetops, when the first infantry formations moved out, silent shapes advancing through the thinning mist. They clashed with Ottoman skirmishers in the underbrush, muskets cracking like distant thunder. Behind them, the German cavalry rode forward, their armor catching flecks of morning light as they slammed into the exposed Ottoman flanks. From the south, the Austrians pressed hard, pushing the enemy line back step by step. The Allied plan was working, but painfully, agonizingly slowly. Vienna, half dead and fighting for every breath, did not have time for slow. Inside the battered walls, the defenders launched a final desperate sortie, a last attempt to shatter the siege lines before they themselves collapsed. Men who had eaten nothing for days threw their bodies into the fray, determined to buy even a single hour of hope. If the Allied cavalry did not break through soon, the city would fall even with salvation in sight. Atop a low ridge overlooking the battlefield, King Jan Sobieski sat mounted on his massive warhorse, its flanks trembling with anticipation. Behind him stretched one of the most awe-inspiring sights ever witnessed on a field of war. 3,000 winged hussars forming into a flawless, deadly wedge. 3,000 lances lowered as one. 3,000 warriors murmured quiet prayers to the wind. His two sons, Alexander and Yakub, rode at his side, boys by age, but men forged by responsibility and destiny. Sobieski raised his saber, the blade blazing with reflected sunlight. And then the world began to tremble. At noon on September 12, 1683, the heavens did not open with storms. They opened with wings. From the ridge, 3,000 Polish Hussars hurled themselves downslope like a divine thunderbolt. They began at a steady trot, hooves drumming in unison. Within seconds they were at a canter, the ground vibrating beneath 8,000 pounds of charging horseflesh. The speed climbed, gravity dragging them faster and faster until the entire mountain seemed to roar. Their feathered wings caught the wind. The sound, an eerie, rising howl, echoed across the valley like 1,000 hunting eagles diving toward prey. And then, with a final surge, they charged. 18,000 allied cavalry thundered behind them. But it was the Hussars who carved the point of the spear, the first sight the Ottomans saw cresting the slope, the first terror that seized their hearts. From the ramparts of Vienna, the defenders froze in disbelief. To men half dead with hunger and fever, the descending cavalry looked almost supernatural, a living waterfall of steel, sunlight flashing on armor, wings beating in the wind. Many believed they were seeing angels descending in judgment. The Ottoman cavalry surged to intercept thousands of Spahi, veterans of 100 campaigns, elite riders of the East. Their commanders shouted orders, drums pounding as they formed a countercharge. But they had never faced anything like the Winged Hussars. The two forces collided with a force that shook the valley. The sound carried all the way to Vienna's highest tower, a single, explosive crack as though the mountain itself had split open. 18-foot lances exploded against shields and armor. Ottoman riders were knocked from their saddles in a storm of shattered wood and twisted steel. The Hussars punched through the first rank, then tore through the second, then shattered the third, smashing the Ottoman cavalry into chaos. Every time a lance splintered, a Hussar drew his saber or war hammer and continued the onslaught without breaking stride. Behind them, the Allied cavalry widened the breach into a massive wound, ripping the Ottoman formation apart. What began as cracks quickly deepened into fissures, then into an avalanche of panic. A Spahi unit broke and fled. Another followed moments later. Then an entire regiment dissolved into a frantic, scrambling retreat. Panic ignited like dry grass. Ottoman soldiers who had endured 2 months of siege now ran as though the earth itself were collapsing beneath their feet. Units that had never retreated in their history turned and fled toward the riverbanks. The Janissaries, the empire's most feared warriors, attempted to form tight defensive squares at the center. If anyone could hold the line, it was them. But the Hussars slammed into their ranks with impossible momentum, shattering them like glass struck by a hammer. The Polish king rode at the very tip of the charge. Sobieski's warhorse was drenched in blood, his saber crimson to the hilt. His voice rang above the chaos, calling orders, rallying his men, pressing the attack deeper. His sons fought at his side with the fierce determination of princes raised for this single moment in history. He led from the front, not because he sought glory, but because kings must ride first when the world hangs in the balance. From his silk pavilion, Kara Mustafa stared in frozen disbelief at the catastrophe unfolding below. The man who had promised to conquer Europe for the Sultan watched his proud host vanish beneath waves of steel and horseflesh. When he finally saw the Hussars cresting the final ridge, wings shining like a storm of feathers, his courage shattered. He fled, abandoning everything. His gold, his maps, his battle plans, his personal standard, even the golden apple meant for the Sultan's hand. The commander of the mightiest army the Ottoman Empire had ever assembled fled into the night like a man pursued by phantoms. By nightfall, the field was silent. 80,000 Ottoman soldiers were scattered or dead. 15,000 lay still on the grassy slopes. The rest retreated south in total confusion, leaving their siege works abandoned. The greatest host the Sultan had ever gathered, broken in a single afternoon by an army one-third its size. Vienna was saved. Europe was saved. As dusk settled on the ruined city, King Jan Sobieski rode through the gates. The streets overflowed with survivors, gaunt, hollow-cheeked, many too weak to stand. They wept openly. Children reached out to touch his stirrup. Women strewn flowers at the hooves of his horse. Men kissed the boots of Hussar riders. They looked like ghosts brought back from death. Yet for the first time in months, they knew they would live. Sobieski dismounted in the cathedral square, his armor streaked with blood and dust, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. He walked to the altar of St. Stephen's Cathedral, knelt and whispered the words that would echo across centuries. Veni, vidi, Deus visit. I came. I saw. God conquered. Not I conquered. Not we conquered. Not Poland, not Austria, not Germany. God conquered. For Sobieski knew what victory too often makes men forget. That courage is a gift, that strength is borrowed, and that when the impossible bends, it is never by mortal hands alone. The siege was broken. The Ottoman advance halted forever. Never again would the crescent banners threaten the heart of Europe. History had seemed poised to sweep the continent into darkness. And then, on a single September afternoon, it turned. And the sound that turned it was thunder. The thunder of hooves crashing down a mountainside. The thunder of wings shrieking through the wind. The thunder of men who refused to let darkness devour their world. Against all numbers, against all logic, against all despair, Europe stood, because on that day, the Polish Winged Hussars rode into legend and carried civilization on their backs. And the echo of their thunder still rolls through history. Proof that courage, faith, and unity can turn the tide of the world.